What's up, friends? Hello, podcast friends. Hello. No laughing, bro.
Sorry.
This is serious business.
I am sorry.
Hello, podcast friends. Welcome to 12-Week Relationships. This is your place for better relationships in weeks, not years. My name is Pye, and this is my friend,
Dr. Glenn.
Dr. Glenn. Don't you forget that. I won't forget that.
Thanks, man.
So this is episode 2.
Yes.
We're talking about why triggers are your best friend. They are your best roadmap to personal growth. Glenn, what the hell are we talking about?
I know it sounds crazy, but those emotions that trigger beyond your ability to rationalize, where you feel like you're losing control, they're not irrational emotions. They're actually there to help you heal.
I'm gonna need you to. I mean, I've already been sold on this process,
Yes.
So I'm speaking on part of our audience here. But the first time that I heard this, I was like,
Yes.
I kind of like what you're saying because it's inward focused, but at the same
Yes.
time, what the hell you're talking about? So what are these triggers that you're speaking of?
So there's 3 basic triggers. It comes from your nervous system response. So, like if a tiger comes into the room, we're either going to fight the tiger to survive.
All the time. This happens all the time.
Yes, all the time, especially in this place, right?
When a tiger, Anthony's our tiger. When
Anthony
he
is-
comes into the room, I'm like,
We got to either fight, flee, or run, freeze,
and clear out. Okay, so yes.
So
Sorry.
you're going to fight the tiger, so you got to defend yourself,
That's
right?
a stupid idea.
You got to flee the tiger because you're scared and you got to run away, right?
Seems better. Yeah.
The third one is the freeze response, where you're frozen because you run out of options and you feel like you can't move and you're just playing dead, hoping that the tiger will go away.
That seems like a really bad idea
Right.
too.
The same thing happens in trauma. So in your emotional world, once this nervous system component goes into your emotional world, when you get so angry that you feel that you have to defend yourself to your family and friends, and it feels so justified to cuss that person out, that's your survival mechanism coming into play.
That's being triggered.
That is being triggered. When you get so anxious, not just, normal fear, but you get so anxious that you feel like you have to run away, panicking, having anxiety attack after anxiety attack, that is a trigger that's leading you to become more independent, right?
Interesting.
And then if you freeze, like you're frozen, you feel like you cannot move and you have no options, that's your body telling you, you know what, you don't have to decide anything because you're emotionally overwhelmed. Let's start sorting out and let going things that are not working in your life so you can figure out what you're going to do next.
Okay. So these are basically the moments where somebody, something, they do something and essentially, I mean, for me, it's like it gets me seeing red. Like
Sure.
I no longer
Sure.
rationally think.
Mhm.
It's more like you want to scream. You want to scream.
Yes.
You
Yes.
want to fight back. You want to do whatever it is,
Yes.
but you're not thinking anymore.
Yes.
It's gone into like this instinctual response.
Yes.
That's what you're talking about when you say like that sympathetic response, right?
Yes. You can, like the mind is racing beyond your ability to rationalize.
Okay.
And yeah, when you're in that state, you're being triggered because your trauma is coming out at that moment.
So I'm trying to think to help kind of put this into context. What would some examples of things? What are some things that would trigger you, Glenn?
I actually had a lot of triggers. I mean, to be honest with you, it was through the triggers that I had to, take a really hard look at myself. For example, remember we had that conversation where you're like, man, there's no way I could picture you being that way before, right?
Yeah. It's hard to picture you angry. To be honest.
Angry. I was such an angry human being, right? I was constantly defending myself in survival mode. Life sucks. You can't you just have to survive and you just got to get by, right? So the people that were the meanest, the people that were the unhappiest, they would trigger me because that was triggering within myself how I was behaving too.
I like this. I told Glenn we're going deep, dude.
Yeah.
We're going deep. See, this is my favorite part about this podcast because you're no longer the only therapist in the room. So I get to therapize the
You
therapist.
get to therapize me, yeah. And I need it. Believe me, I need it.
So,
You
so what would be specific examples for you of people that would say things or do things? Like, what are the specific things that would get you triggered?
Certain things like, you can't do this, and you just gotta play it safe.
Yeah.
And then I would be like, oh, that would really trigger me
Yeah.
because I didn't want to do that, but then that's what I was doing.
Someone playing down your ability to do.
Yeah. Or don't be so negative. Why is this person so negative? I'm getting triggered.
Yeah.
because I'm that negative deep down. I could maybe put on a front temporarily, but deep down I had all that negativity inside of me. So I'm just getting angry at myself.
You know what does it for me?
What?
Like if you ever see me now in the future, I feel like people are going to come up and just like trigger us just to like for fun.
Probably just to mess with us
Just to
after this podcast. Yeah. I got your 12 weeks right here, you know. Yeah.
For me, it's hypocritical statements.
Sure.
So when somebody else confronts me about something that they themselves are not doing, oh man, that puts me in like
Yeah.
a bad place. Like,
Sure.
and it's hard because you get that. It was fun reading your book because you talk about this sympathetic versus parasympathetic response. And the sympathetic is that instinctual see red.
Yeah.
And the parasympathetic is pausing yourself long enough to like think through this and to go back to rational thoughts. But man, if a friend comes to me and is like, Pye, I got to talk to you because you're really inconsiderate. And I know that that person is inconsiderate.
Yeah.
Oh man,
It
like
pisses you off.
that grates against me.
Yeah.
And that happens. Like, I think that's probably the biggest one that family members and friends like will get going in me.
But see, when a person makes that statement to you, the trigger is not being inconsiderate. It's the fact that there has to be boundaries, right? So that
Tell me what you mean by that.
because that person says you're inconsiderate. Usually the people that like, you know, complain and say, you're the one that's doing this. They're the ones that are very inconsiderate, right?
Correct.
So that's their trigger saying that you're inconsiderate.
Correct.
On the flip side, you're getting upset because this person is toxic and therefore you're not setting boundaries. So you're being triggered by the fact that you're not setting boundaries. So
Yeah.
within this dynamic of both being triggered, this person needs to recognize that they're inconsiderate. For you, maybe it's about setting better boundaries with that person.
See, that's what was interesting to me about your process. So before we started this whole journey, we are now business partners, which is crazy to me because you are the
Yeah.
first business partner that we've taken on in over a decade.
Wow.
So
I'm honored.
it's been me, Justin, and Chris this whole time.
I'm honored.
And yeah, so you are what set this apart for me was when I hired you and I was like, you know what? Before we work together, I want to feel your process from the inside as a client. Let's make sure that this is a good fit. And you brought up to me, I told you that this situation, I think it was a situation similar to what I just described. It was like this moment of like, you know, how can someone else not see what they're doing and bring that up to me as the issue? And your remark was, yeah, that is, you know, annoying, but you're the one that has the work to do. Because that's essentially what you're saying right now.
Yeah. Because you're giving, if you blame the other person, you're giving your power away versus this is coming from within. This person is just doing what they're doing, but the trigger itself, it's something that you need to resolve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know for a lot of people, the idea of ownership, the idea of like stepping up and saying that that's my responsibility to resolve can be scary, can be something that you want to push away, could be, you know, I want to deny that. I don't want to deal with that responsibility. But I've come to learn for myself that anything you can give me ownership over is an area of my life that I have control of. If I am, you know, bending over backwards, or if I am at the mercy of what these other people are doing, then I have no choice in the matter. I have no ability to control what's going on around me. So when you said that this trigger was something that I personally needed to look at and address myself, it was a aha moment in the sense of like, okay, duh, yeah, I do. But it was also empowering. Okay, that is something that I can take control over. That is something that gives me back my power.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we talked about in the previous podcast where you were talking about the roadmap. Your SSRM is a roadmap, right? So to me, triggers is
We should say SSRM is the stupid simple relationship method.
The stupid simple relationship method. Sorry, but you had a roadmap in terms of having a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
To me, triggers are the roadmap to your healing.
Yeah.
Right. And then so it's your past happening in present time. And that's what I did. Anything where I got really triggered in anger, I'm like, am I behaving that way? Is that something that I need to change? Or do I need to leave the situation? This is so toxic. I have to go. Right. The other thing was the fear. Like if I had intense anxiety, that meant that I'm losing my independence. I have to be more independent in these areas of my life. What are the skill sets that I need to develop more independence?
Yeah.
The last one is like when I'm indecisive, I feel overwhelmed with emotions. I had to really like take inventory of my life and what do I need to let go of that's not serving me anymore? And all of a sudden, all of like the negative people, family members, people, like I started setting boundaries, like it just started happening naturally. And then all of a sudden, like all these better things started happening in my life. Like you showed up in my life, right? This opportunity showed up in my life because I started honoring those triggers, which totally goes against the whole medical model that, you know, of treatment, of maintenance. Keep yourself in this safe space. My emotions were going everywhere. I was in this expanded state of woundedness and pain, but ultimately it opened me up to find the answers that I was always looking for.
That's the insane part of this, because to go into the symptomatic, the medical approach of like, how do you address these things, to go into what you're talking about on that is essentially that the typical response with counseling and therapy is that if you're triggered, you go to control the trigger. You seek to remove the trigger. And so if I'm talking about, you know, another person over here, it would be directing my language towards that person. You need to work on not triggering me. You need to work on what you're saying so that you're not triggering your friend, you're not triggering your partner, you're not triggering. If we were talking about this from a standpoint of like your environment, it would be removing you from your environment, saying, well, you shouldn't be going to work because that's what's causing your anxiety. You shouldn't be doing these things. This is the exact guidance that I've not only received myself, I've not only seen given in multiple case studies, but also the guidance that my father received for his anxiety. See, when my dad went to his doctor for anxiety, the doctor said, well, you just need to remove yourself from these situations.
Symptom management.
But that to me is wild. It's nuts for several reasons. If you were complaining about back pain, whenever I lift something, I feel pain in my legs and my knees and in everything. The solution would be to go to the gym and to lift weights and strengthen all the muscles in your body so that lifting that thing is no longer heavy. It's no longer straining on your body, right? This is the entire practice of physical therapy. But the actual advice given is to avoid the gym.
Yeah, exactly.
And that just makes the problem worse, because then what do you become?
Right. I mean, that's the same premise when it comes to psychotherapy. Take these pills, you're being irrational, calm down, and just take more medication.
Or cholesterol. Here's some Lipitor.
Here's some Lipitor.
Go and take this, and don't worry about exercising or your lifestyle and what you eat. Go eat that pork belly bun, which we just had
which was very good, by the way. So we're going against what we're saying.
Well, no, I mean, like,
come on.
My cholesterol's somewhat in control. I know the root cause of my cholesterol. So that was fascinating to me, that when it came to these triggers, you were not telling me to go and control the situation, nor were you telling me to go and remove myself from the environment. You were saying that this is a marker for you to actually do the work.
To do the work, to honor that trigger in present time. You're taking action by setting boundaries, and then things will start to work out. So for me, that was a very interesting thing, because it came in the sense of like, I was giving these friends kind of unlimited emotional boundaries to be able to do whatever they wanted. And it was a frustrating thing to come to that realization. But the fix and the stop of the triggers, it all happened when I simply said, like, you know, this is a healthy boundary and this is where we're going to make cutoffs. And I'm not going to have expectations for anything beyond that anymore. I don't expect you to be extra considerate. I don't expect for you to do these things, because we're friends. This is the cutoff of that. And when I did that, the trigger stopped. Because you took your power back.
Yeah.
You took your power back. And then when you say that you have emotional control, you're calming your nervous system down. Because when it's external, it's always going to stay on, because you're always at the mercy of your environment.
Yeah.
And once you took that power back, you're good to go.
Now, this is again where I got to put you on the hot seat. I love our mics, dude. These mics are fantastic. I can like go in deep voice. I can like, you know. Okay. So I actually heard some of your backstory, your triggers, the things that led you to create what we now use as trauma-triggered therapy, or 3T, within our model of therapy.
Right.
I'd like you to share some of those things. What brought you to this place where you realize that I have to look at these inward markers and not try to control the environment?
So, I mean, basically my upbringing, it was a loving family, but it was also a dysfunctional family. And then so I had there's like the joke among like Korean mothers, but there's something known as borderline personality disorder. So when I was teaching a graduate level class, And I was going over like what borderline is. It's like a very chaotic person who's like all up and down, triangulates, blames people, plays the victim, goes on the attack. And then one of the Korean students, she raised her hand and she's all, aren't all Korean mothers borderline? And I was like, yes, A for you, right? A for you,
You win.
You win, because all Korean mothers are that way, right? But I grew up in this very like dysfunctional home. There's a lot of expectations. You know, a lot of times I was parenting the parents.
Yeah.
And then in my adult life, I started picking environments that would mimic that.
Interesting.
Right? I started to get triggered, like, ooh, this is exciting, or this is what's going on. So at the time, I took it as like instinct.
Yeah.
And I took it as like, oh, this is like a positive thing. But then it ended up just mimicking my past experiences, right? So like I was in a...
Well, it feels familiar to you, right?
It felt familiar to me. So I went from that upbringing to like a job, which was like I was getting death threats, and I was getting like, you know, when I was doing well, like I was, you know, going to get promoted. And then
this is when you were in social work.
This is when I was in social work.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like death threats, we're going to kill you. I had my tire slashed.
You're like, oh, my mom used to say these things. It's fine.
Yeah. But the crazy thing was it still like, it felt familiar. Like I was like, cool. Like I just stayed in and I tried to work it out versus like, I should have just left. Right.
Yeah.
And then eventually it got so bad that like I wanted to leave. I started getting healthier. And then like, I was just like, man, I want out. They wouldn't let me go. So I ended up like getting an attorney. And then they put me on this work comp case. So work comp is all about management. So then instead of like, hey, what you should see a therapist to talk this out, they sent me to an acupuncturist. Right. So I didn't see anybody for like 6 years. And then I went through this, it was like a whole long ordeal. And I started, you know, looking at other areas of my life. But I started looking at all the triggers. At first, I followed the medical model, which is maintenance. Try to work this out. Try to go back to the county job.
Use some symptom management.
Yeah, use some symptom management. And I was trying to go back and try to make it work out because this is a safe job. You get a retirement package, all those other things. But I just started to deteriorate. Like the trauma of it all just like accumulated. And then all of the techniques and all the coping skills that, you know, to try to maintain it wasn't working for me.
Yeah.
And then it just got really, really bad for me. Like it got really, really bad. And then so I had to seek help elsewhere. Like I had to go outside of the whole work comp case. And then literally like one of the specialists I saw, he was like, dude, your brain is literally like a person that just came back from war.
Yeah.
So I was diagnosed with like depression. They're like, oh, you're depressed. But I was like, you have severe trauma because this is like not good for you. All this energy is being stored. And then so, you know, I was like, oh my God, thank God, because I could feel myself like something's not right. And then after that period, I was all on board with this guy until I got the medical model treatment. And what did he tell me? He goes, you know what? Now that you have all this trauma, you better slow down your life, lower your expectations, and basically just try to get by. Maybe just teach.
It's the same advice I was giving my dad.
Maybe just teach, but don't do this. And that's where like I kind of split. Like I was like, okay, I'm thankful that I have the information, but my emotions, the strong emotions, that's where I made the shift. And I'm like, I'm going to honor everything that I feel, the triggers, and I'm going to figure this out. And so I kind of like, you know, the job thing kind of blew up, but then all of a sudden, like I had another opportunity to kind of live out the life that I wanted to live. And you know, that's how all of this happened for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I honored every trigger, every anger, and no matter how painful it was, I honored it.
So that's, I guess, what I want to talk about next is those that are listening to this, for me, myself, for any of us, what is the step-by-step process of honoring a trigger? Like, what are we supposed to do in that moment that something happens? What would we go through?
So, for example, like if you get really angry and you feel like cussing your family out, or you want to cuss your friends out, when you act out, you're basically giving your power away, because then they're gonna be like, oh, you crazy, right? Like, what are you doing? You're gonna regret it later.
That's the worst possible thing you could do, is actually just react to it openly. React to it,
right? Versus like, okay, I should just leave. Mm-hmm. You leave the situation and take it, take that message as, this is toxic for me. I'm outgrowing this environment. I think I need to leave.
Well, and leaving the situation is not to say like necessarily permanently leaving it. It's more like
leaving it.
For right now, I need to step away to process, right?
Sure. But then over a period of time, like for example, this happens in friend groups or family groups where like, if you have a really negative environment and then one person is trying to do good, right? And then they're working their way out, like they're becoming stronger. groupthink takes over and everyone's going to attack that person that's trying to become more positive, right?
Yeah.
When that happens, people take it as, oh my God, something's wrong with me. I got to dial it back. That's the time, because you're going to get triggered.
Yeah.
That's the time to say, I'm out of here. This is not healthy for me anymore. I'm going to leave this.
See, I can see that. And I can also see there's another side. So to play devil's advocate for 1 second, I feel like when you're in that state of, first, when you're seeing red,
Sure.
number one to me is to remove the environment so that I can at least process.
Sure.
I need to get to a place where I can process,
Sure.
but not to make any decisions yet.
Sure.
Because whenever I am caught up in that like mentality, I'm not, when I'm actually seeing red, I will make decisions that are insane when it comes to like the long-term repercussions, you know, like this is not healthy for me, for my family, for anything, but I'm so angry in that moment that I'm willing to do anything, the nuclear option.
Sure.
So for me, it's removing from the environment first, then reevaluating when you are, we're probably going to talk about this a lot, not under a state of halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
Sure.
You've heard this probably a bajillion times. But when you can actually process at that point and then look at it and say, is that an environment that I need to get out of and that's just generally negative? Or is this a positive environment?
So this is my personal feeling. If you get that triggered by that environment and you're really doing the work on yourself, you need to go. Like, that's the healthy choice. Because if you're trying to justify it and trying to, that means you still have work to do and you still want to stay in it.
Well, let me present then a different scenario.
Okay.
So along those lines, what about somebody, because we've had situations like this, right? I've seen situations like this where an individual lacks confidence in their own skill set and ability. It's not that they're not skilled. It's not that they aren't good at what they do, but they have this sort of like imposter syndrome. Okay. You put them into a boardroom, you put them into a conference room, you put them somewhere where there's presentation of ideas and their ideas getting criticized.
Okay.
And their response to it is not good. It's essentially triggering them, making them feel like they have to defend every possible thing.
Sure.
Like, I'm the expert here. I'm the professional here.
Sure.
How come you guys don't trust my sense in this? What you can clearly see that they're taking what is actually healthy criticism,
Sure,
but they're spinning it in a negative way. And I can see like in that environment.
But that's not a toxic environment though. That's actually a healthy environment. So that's the reverse. That's the reverse, right?
Couldn't they perceive it that way though?
They can. And that shows you like that's their trigger. So
Correct.
It goes both ways. If you're in a most people when a good opportunity comes up, they sabotage it.
Yeah.
And that's an example of self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
Right? That's a trigger. Self-sabotaging is a trigger.
Because that's my worry when we talk about triggers as a whole, is that some people don't recognize, I see this a lot in like online communities, right? The whole idea of toxicity and like this, it's like a word that just gets thrown around.
Yeah.
Oh, that's toxic. You got to go. When in reality, a lot of these environments are not toxic. They're positive, but you're spinning everything to be toxic. So how do people?
Because they're toxic. Like healthy environments will bring out the good and the bad in people. So like in that example, it brought out her own triggers and toxicity because a healthy environment gives it permission to do so. Like this is when you look at triggers, most people think triggers happen when you're in bad environments. Not really so. Like if you're really stressed out, all your crazy and trauma will stay at bay. But once you're in a good situation and things start to like really settle down, that's when all your triggers have permission to come out. So in that example, you provided a healthy environment for that person. They're doing what they need to do. And then they got triggered because now they have all their trauma issues coming out.
Is there a way for somebody to know? Because what I would be fearful of is that they would stay in toxic environments too long because they're looking to solve only these triggers within and leave healthy environments too quick because they think that it's external.
Yeah. So, I mean, one is if you're in a state of dependency where you're like depending upon other people or circumstances or environments emotionally, you're never going to flip that switch. Like you're always going to be in this helpless state. Once you're like, I'm going to take ownership of my emotional world, then you can differentiate. This is healthy and I'm being triggered. This is bad. I need to leave.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's that shift of ownership of your emotions.
Yeah. That's an interesting one because I'm trying to wrap my head around if there's a simple,
So like, have you heard of the 90-10 principle?
yeah. Well,
So-
I've heard 90-10 many different ways used, but yes.
90-10. So 10%, if you go 10% of your emotions is based off of your environment, which is 90% you, right? That is an ownership of my emotions are basically my own. Things can trigger me, but ultimately it's coming from within.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, if you say 90% of your emotions is environmental, 10% is only you, that's what creates learned helplessness. You're helpless to your environment. You
Interesting.
become depressed, you become anxious, you become overwhelmed. And if a person's trying to problem solve in that state, nothing's ever going to work out.
That's really interesting. Side note, we're episode 2 into this, and I have not yet introduced Anthony.
Oh, we got to introduce Anthony. The
Anthony.
tiger, man.
Our tiger.
He chases us around, man.
So Anthony is the man behind the scenes, and not really so behind the scenes, because he will chime in from time to time with questions and thoughts of his own. But
Yes.
Anthony, if you have any, you always have permission to ask.
Yeah, I actually did have a question to what you were just saying. I was actually going to ask that too. If you're in a position where running away isn't necessarily the answer because you are in a healthy environment and
Yes.
you're unable to kind of figure out the situation, like how do you?
So give me the example.
Oh, what was it? It's pretty much like if you're in a conference room and you're taking criticism, which
Yeah,
isn't bad,
yeah.
but you're reading it as though it's a bad thing. How do you?
What do you feel? What are you feeling? Like, what are you feeling in that situation?
If I were in this situation, I probably want to run. That'd probably be the first instinct.
You want to run away. So there's like
Yeah.
a lot of anxiety there.
Yeah.
And what's the fear underneath that? Like, what are you afraid of happening?
It's probably really just judgment.
Judgment and
Yeah.
criticism. Because what happens if you're judged and criticized?
Then you are exposed as, I guess,
A fraud.
Yeah.
A fraud, right?
Yeah.
So like that mentality is that you have to be compliant with what others want, right? Because you're at the mercy of everyone's judgment.
Mm-hmm.
What would happen if you were able to say that whatever my opinion is, whether people agree or not,
Mm-hmm.
is my own opinion, and I'm not going to die.
Mm-hmm.
There's no danger other than it's just my opinion.
Is that something that you have to process afterwards once you leave the situation? Or
You could process it during. So when, for example, if you expect before going to that meeting to feel anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
you can flip the switch and say, you know what? The feeling of running away is because I was acting dependent toward other people's opinions, just like
Mhm.
the tiger, right? Versus saying, my opinion is my own. You still have the freedom of choice to do what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Even if people criticize you and they're like, this sucks, right? Are you going to die?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to die. Nothing's going to kill you, right? So it's the independence and saying, I'm going to be independent regardless of what people say.
Do you think it's a good idea if you're in that situation with the group of people that you're presenting to, just to
Yeah.
be honest that, hey, like this, I am maybe a little sensitive to this information. It's not to say that you guys shouldn't like lighten up on your vocabulary, but just I might be taking it the wrong way. So if I respond a certain way,
Yeah, I think that
See, I have
transparency
a
is
hard
good.
time with that, though.
Or
Because from my perspective, if you were to say that, it weakens your position
mm-hmm.
in terms of like the way that I would view you professionally in your skill set would kind of be diminished.
depending upon the situation. I think in this environment, it would be okay though, right?
In this one, yes, because it's
Yeah.
like kind of open
Yeah.
and discussing things. But if you're in an environment like, let's say you are, think of an area where you would be very open to criticism. Would be one of like, say, doing design work, right? Design work is inherently subjective. So you're going to, regardless of whether it's architectural design, website design, whatever kind of design you're doing, you're going to be presenting something to a group of people who are going to be criticizing what it is that you're doing. And if you were to say, hey guys, I'm kind of sensitive to criticism and like what you say, so maybe be careful about the way you say it.
That could change the power dynamic. I get
That shifts the power dynamic
got you.
dramatically.
I got you. What about in that scenario though, if you gave yourself permission to be anxious? Like instead of trying to stop the fear, you gave yourself permission to feel anxiety. You could blow it up. You could try to get as nervous as you want,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at the same time, what are the skill sets that are required of you in that scenario to establish independence for yourself? What skill sets do you need to develop where you could feel more confident so that even if you do take criticism or positive feedback, that you can handle it?
That's a great question.
What's-
You're essentially saying, what would you need to be as a designer to feel confident?
To be able to handle it. So it's about skill sets, establishing an independence. Anxiety means independence.
Mm-hmm.
It's leading you to be more independent instead of dependent. What would happen if you were less dependent upon people's opinions and more independent in terms of what you brought to the table?
And that would be more work that's done outside of that situation.
Internally, right? Because you're taking the power back, saying that it's not coming from them. They're triggering it, but it's coming from my own fears within, right? Because if the whole fear of like any type of judgment or criticism or social phobia is that you're going to be embarrassed and that you're no good. So it's the working through that I am good.
So that to me is the solution to that that trigger. To me, that feels like, number one, it feels like being able to remove yourself from the situation long enough where you can get past the sympathetic response, right? The sympathetic response being like, I'm going to fight, flight, whatever it's going to be. But understanding that, A, this is not a life or death situation. Disconnect your instinctual sympathetic response to think rationally. Number two, going into, okay, is this environmental? Is 90% of my issue coming from this environment itself? Or is, am I dealing with 10% of the things that are happening are causing me to have a 90% reaction to things? And that means that I need to focus inward. And if it's the latter, which I would think that as a designer in a boardroom who's being criticized, it's not that you're in a negative environment per se. It's that the internal work on gaining a level of comfort has not yet been done.
It's that learned helplessness response. You're putting too much of your emotional well-being based on the environment versus yourself.
Yes. And maybe you, like in so many of these cases, the person has done all the work to belong there. They were hired by the company in the first place, right? They've done the work to belong there. What they haven't done is given them permission. Like, they don't give themselves permission to feel like they belong there. So in their minds, they have like some sort of thing that's set up that says that when I get to this place, this will be when I deserve to be here. And that thing has not yet. And usually that thing is like very not justifiable. Like, when I've published a design book like this person, then I will be a good designer. But that's not a really objective way of looking at it, nor is it something that you might even be able to achieve. So it would be doing the work to basically adjust that bar to say, look, I am this.
And then also redefining, you don't have to label anxiety as being bad. It's a trigger toward independence. But do you know, like, most people that suffer high anxiety, they're very ambitious people. So is it fair to say that you're a very ambitious person?
Yeah.
So part of being ambitious is having some sense of anxiety. So it's developing the skill sets of independence to match your ambition versus I'm a weak person or I'm a bad person and they're triggering me because they might criticize me. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Really cool question. See, that's why I want you to be chiming in here.
Yeah, man.
All right. So to run that all back, just to say you are triggered by something.
Yes.
I say something that, what were the examples that you gave earlier?
Which one?
I don't know. What were the things that I could do to trigger you, Glenn? Let me trigger you right now. I say something, you're seeing red.
Yeah. Take a step back.
Take a step back.
Like you said, take a step back. Don't react to the situation because then you're giving power to your environment. So definitely, like, don't do anything and then process the information. 2,
is the trigger, is it environmental or is it internal in nature?
So 2, the mentality is that it's 10% is the environment triggering your internal 90% state, which is a lot of times your trauma issues coming out.
When it's that dynamic, then you're looking at a healthy environment, but you're looking at unhealthy internal.
Correct. So once you're in this 10-90 response, that the environment is triggering my emotional response, you can start differentiating between healthy and unhealthy environments.
Okay. But if 90% of things are causing you to just...
If you take that internal belief, you're not going to be able to differentiate anything.
Well, I'm saying if you find that, like, because in your situation, it was an environment, just a bad environment.
But I chose that environment. So that's where, like, it became, instead of being this victim of like, oh my God, I was helpless to this environment, I had other options. I always could have left that job.
I see.
But I didn't because I was acting in this helpless state, right? So I stayed in that space, being triggered, doing all the work because I still had emotional work to do.
So step 3 would then be to identify the emotional work that needs to get done.
Correct.
And in that situation, why were you there in the first place?
Right. And take ownership of it. So instead of people, like, some people would say, I'm taking it too far, right? Like, I would say from a spiritual standpoint, I chose that place to work through all my other issues.
Yeah.
And I really believe that because I could have left at any time.
Yeah.
But I stayed for a really long time.
And similarly, the designer that's in the boardroom that's giving the presentation,
Right.
they have chosen to be there. They have been selected to be there based on their qualifications. There's something internally that is making it so they don't
Yes.
feel.
They're in a healthy environment, so the anxiety is reflective of, man, I have to allow these healthy qualities to come out now.
Mhm.
So that's a healthy trigger.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Kind of like it's a trigger from an environment that's basically asking you to look inside yourself.
Yeah, like I would say like maybe in previous environments, Anthony, like maybe it was frowned upon to be independent or to speak your voice. Is that something that's kind of accurate?
More or less, yeah.
So now that you're in this environment that gives you permission to do so, there's anxiety there because you're not used to it. You're triggered because it's like you're not supposed to do that. So you have to work through it internally, but you also have the permission to play it out now and be that healthy person that you've always wanted to be. That's a great opportunity.
Yeah, it's an awesome way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I love the whole approach to the way that you deal with triggers and trauma. So
Yeah.
this has been a very, I think, enlightening episode. Well, I think we are done with episode 2. So if you guys would like to learn a bit more, maybe work on your own relationships, be sure to check out 12weekrelationships.com. There is a button there where you guys can sign up for a free 15-minute consult with Dr. Glenn. Maybe one day with me in the future. Who knows?
You got it, man.
Who
Let's
knows?
do it. Let's do it.
And in the meantime, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast. We also have an email newsletter. We promise not to abuse your emails. We're just going to send tips here and there throughout your week to help you all out in maybe common relationship scenarios that you might be encountering, but it's going to be all valuable, good stuff. So that's it for us. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.